Hello! Welcome to the video. I'm Melissa, I write books. I'm currently wearing a teal headband that was in fashion about 7 years ago. So I'm continuing to ride the teal cloth headband wave that I know swept the nation. One thing I've noticed about Authortube is that people in my real life will ask me things like, what are all these words that you're saying? What is a NaNoWriMo? What is that? You're talking about this every day. What does this mean? And I also think when you first start to consume Authortube content, there's all these words that people are using all the time, and what do they mean? And I feel like some of them have different meanings depending on who's saying them. So this is going to be an Authortube vocab lesson. I essentially just wrote down all of the ones I could think of. I'm probably missing a ton of them. So if you want me to do more videos like this, drop all the vocab that I'm forgetting. So let's start kind of in order of operations. The first word I have is zero draft. So drafts in general, wow, we're really gonna go basic here. A draft of a book is essentially like one phase. I think people define drafts in different ways. Like I would consider a new draft to be like significantly different in some way. After the first draft, I do a revision and I make a bunch of changes, and because of those changes, it then becomes the second draft, right? Some people would maybe consider it like if you go from beginning to end and you finish one thing, like each of those could be a draft. Really, there's no like specific rule of you have to spend this much time on it for it to be a draft, or you have to make this many changes on it to be a draft. It's however you want to organize it in your mind. A zero draft is a term that's often used that's actually very ambiguous. I think people use it in different ways. So for me, a zero draft is like a really extended outline, like bullet points, and it's kind of messy. Like you skip scenes and put in bullet points, and maybe you were just writing dialogue or you're just doing other things. Not coherent enough to be a first draft, but honestly, I don't think you need to have a zero draft. I think you can just call whatever your first thing is your first draft. But if you hear people using the term zero draft, it's usually referring to a version of the story that is not yet readable in like a traditional, typical way. So I know people who like put a bunch of note cards on the wall and call that a zero draft. Like all of these words, we like to name things because we're writers, but like that's what people are usually talking about. Under the category of outlines, there's reverse outlining is a term that you might have heard. So reverse outline is once you've already written the book, if you decide to outline the book again, like creating an outline after the book already exists, I believe is what reverse outlining is. Or if you outline it from the end to the beginning. I don't know. That makes sense. Let me know. I don't know. I don't do one of these. The next one I probably should have started with is WIP or WIP. That stands for work in progress. Some people say WIP, some people say WIP. We all just made it up. It's all fake, whatever you want to call it. But when you hear people saying that, the project you're currently working on, you can have multiple WIPs or WIPs. This kind of next category is like categories that we put ourselves in as writers. So we have pantser, we have plantser, we have planner, we have puzzler. Let me explain. So a pantser traditionally is someone who does not work with an outline. They just write the book on the seat of their pants. That's where the pants part of that comes from. A planner or a plotter, those words are kind of used interchangeably as somebody who outlines the book fully before writing it. And then in between, we have a couple of different things. So we have a plantser, which I think is a combination of plan and pantser. I think most people honestly fall somewhere between. And so whatever language feels right to you, use it. There's not like dictionary definitions to these. Puzzler is also one I've heard, where you have a few things figured out, or when you run into something, you puzzle it out. I don't really know. I haven't seen a lot of puzzlers, but I've heard that term. There's also not deer in the headlights. There's also a headlights writer, which means you kind of outline plan what's right in front of you and then write it, and then plan what's in front of you and then write it, But there's lots of different ways to do it. Those are just terms that people like to use. We also have a dialogue first draft. So this is a new concept, relatively. Maybe it's not. Maybe people have been doing it since the dawn of time. But the people I think who come to mind are, I believe Chris does this. Maybe making that up, I don't know. But I know Ari from Ari's Pages also did something like that recently, where you just write the dialogue for the book first. Like that, the whole draft, just the dialogue. And then you go back into the second draft and fill it in. So some people would consider that a 0 draft. Some people would consider it a rough draft. Everybody kind of defines these words differently. So here's some other kind of random terms that we use to mark time. So we have the Pomodoro, used before. It's in reference to a old study technique that's like from a tomato timer, is where the Pomodoro comes from, like a Pomodoro tomato. It's this style of work where you write for, or you're on for 25 minutes, and then you take a break for 5 minutes, and then you're on for another 25 minutes, and then you take a break for 5 minutes. And after, I think it's every hour or maybe every 2 hours, you take a 15-minute break. A lot of writers will use this in writing sprints or just talk about generally working in Pomodoros. There's lots of apps, like the tree app where you grow the trees, I believe operates in like similar sprints. In the same vein, the term sprint refers to like a period of time that you dedicate to writing. So if I say I'm gonna do a 25-minute sprint, I'm gonna do 25 minutes, I'm gonna set a timer, I'm gonna go, go, go. So that's kind of a few ways that we track our time. Another thing that you will see people do is have like project name for things to refer to whatever WIP, quiz. What does WIP mean? Work in progress, correct. But people will refer to them as like projects. So for example, my adult thriller right now that I'm working on is called Project Gas Station. I just picked that. You pick it. Some people will do like a letter, so it's like Project C. I think Sarah Labrat has Project DE. It's essentially, we do this because either you don't have a title for the book yet, or you can't reveal the title for the book, because a lot of authors will do title reveals, or they have a contract with the publisher where they can't reveal the title. Many people will do this until they have a title that they can share. When you hear people talking about like, I'm working on Project Golden Eyes, like the people just do this to kind of identify what they're working on. So for example, the book I'm querying right now, the title that I'm querying with is The Wedding Season, but that like the project named was Project Groove. That's like really an Authortube thing. I don't know who started that, but it's since the dawn of time. That's what Authortubers have been doing. Next, I'll kind of go into a few really common outlining structures or things that people talk about. So just generally an outline is planning out the plot points of the book, right? Some people do this on a board with a bunch of, you know, dry erase markers or sticky notes or whatever you want to use. Some people do it on paper, whatever. An outline in itself is just essentially like telling yourself the story in plot points, right? There are a few really common outlining structures that you will hear people reference, specifically me. One of them, I think probably the most popular, is Save the Cat Writes a Novel. So this is a book that's actually based on a book for screenwriters. That's why it's called Writes a Novel. And it has like 22 different story beats that you kind of fit your story into, or that help guide where your story goes. So it divides the book into Act 1, Act 2, Part 1, Act 2, Part 2, and Act 3. And it has different points that your character would want to see. Similarly, there's Romancing the Beat is another one I've heard of, which is a similar, it's like a beat structure for romance writers. I believe there's probably these things for other genres as well, but the ones that I most commonly hear are Save the Cat, Romancing the Beat. There's also like just a 4-act structure or a 5-act structure. These are just referring to the way that people are outlining and structuring their books. And most people, or a lot of people, will have videos explaining like, what is the 4-act structure? What are all the beats of the 4-act structure? That's just how people are like organizing their book, right? There's also the snowflake method, which I don't actually know what that is. So we'll save that one for the next video and I'll research it for you. And moving into the different types of editing that you'll hear people say. So if people are drafting a book, that means that they are writing a book. They're like writing the first draft, they're writing words, which seems like it should be super obvious, but I remember not knowing that, and I'd hear people say drafting and I'm like, what are you talking about? Then we have developmental edits, which is a stage where you like look at the plot of your book and see like what needs to change. Are there character things that need to change? This person doesn't have a motivation, or, you know, like big picture edits is developmental edits. Then we have copy edits and line edits. So I have seen these terms kind of thrown around willy-nilly. The way that I have previously heard of it is that line edits are thinking more on like a paragraph line flow level, like does the sentence flow, right? And then copy edits are like, is this comma in the right place? Cut this and this isn't grammatically correct. But I think it's actually opposite. Like I think that copy edits are more like larger and then line edits are smaller, but I think it just kind of depends on what circle you're in. The moral of the story is do both of them. In this sort of vein is beta readers. So these are people, and critique partners. So beta readers and critique partners are different. I have been using them interchangeably because a lot of my beta readers are very constructive readers and they give me feedback similar to how a critique partner would. I just don't critique any of their work because they don't have anything ready for me. So I use them interchangeably, but that's not the case. So a critique partner typically would go first, and that is somebody who typically you'll exchange pages or sections or books, and you'll see like, oh, maybe this doesn't make sense. Like critique partners can be a part of your developmental editing process, your drafting process. Like these are people who you're working really collaboratively with. And then beta readers traditionally are people that you give to the book to like like when you're done with it, when you have looked at it and said, okay, this is all I can do. This is the best it can be. It's clean, it's edited, it's nice. And so they're kind of like a gut check reader of like any major things you might be missing. People also use the term alpha readers, which I believe is you're giving it to readers before the book is actually done. I use these words kind of interchangeably, so people might as well, but that's like what they actually mean, I believe. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Then, okay, this one's kind of doesn't really fall into a category, but dictation, you might hear on this channel a lot, is when it's like speak to text. So if I say a sentence, if I write without my fingers, I write just through talking, which I do typically when I draft. So that's what dictation is when you are talking. So if you were to text someone and you're like my mom or someone who like talks into your phone like, hey grandma, nice to see, you know, like that's dictation technically. So then kind of getting into the different levels or the different categories of publishing. So if you hear people talk about self-publishing or indie publishing, that means that they are not going through a traditional publisher, or they don't need a literary agent. You can just self-publish on your own. Obviously that is a lot of work still, and typically self-published authors still will hire editors and cover designers and all those types of people, but they will publish it through book distributors. So KDP, Ingram Spark. I don't know much about self-publishing, so I'm not gonna be your best resource here, but like what self-publishing means is that you are the initiator. Like if you don't do anything, the book's not gonna get published. You are publishing the book through these places. Traditional publishing is the process of like working with a literary agent to get your book published by typically a big 5 publisher, but a publishing house essentially. So the process to get a traditional publishing deal, to get your book published that way, is first you have to do a process called querying, which is where you essentially send a cover letter, a synopsis, and some sample pages out to literary agents. And literary agents are people who work with the author and represent the author and their book. So it's very difficult to get a literary agent, and most people end up sending like 100, like a lot of query letters out. And it's very typical to get a form rejection. If the agent likes your cover letter, they might request more pages, they might request a full manuscript. You only query a book typically, there are exceptions to every rule, but you typically only query a book when it is done, polished, like there's nothing left to do. If you're represented by a literary agent, then your literary agent pitches the book to editors, and then editors have to pitch the book to an acquisition team. And at that point, then they would be buying your book to be distributed and published. So it's a very, very long process. It typically takes years to get traditionally published, but typically you have larger distribution, more marketing resources and editors. So there's give and take to both, but those are kind of the main two categories of publishing that people might talk about. Then kind of the categories. So YA, it means young adult, just in case you needed to hear that today. Then there's adult. There's also NA, which is new adult, which is not typically a genre in traditional publishing, although there have been a few traditional publishers who have opened new adult publishing imprints. Middle grade is also a category, and then there's YA, but sometimes YA will be categorized into upper YA and lower YA, just depending on the content. Typically in YA, there is not gratuitous violence, excessive swearing, bedroom behavior, but sometimes there is. It really just depends. I would argue there should not be in YA. And then adult is typically reserved for like darker themes, older characters. Your character's age can often be an indicator, but there definitely can be adult books that are about children or teenagers, right? But there typically wouldn't be a YA book following a 40-year-old man. That'd be kind of weird. Then there's some other abbreviations. If you see MMC or MC, MC stands for main character. So if you see an F or an M on the front of that, female main character, male main character. There's also, like, people will use this to categorize the romance. So if it's MMC/MMC, that typically would indicate that the two love interests are men, right? But that's what people are talking about, is my MC, my OTP. My OTP, I don't think the authors are using. I think that's more for fan fiction or like fandom. It's like one true pairing or something, I believe. I don't know. Did I define NaNoWriMo? Okay, let's end with that. So NaNoWriMo stands for National Novel Writing Month. It is 3 different months. It's an organization, but the main event is November, where the challenge is to write 50,000 words of a new book in November, and you can use this website to track. It's a very big month for the author community, where you write 1,667 words, 1,667 words a day, or an average of that. And then there's also 2 camps where you can kind of choose your own project and choose your own goal, which are April and July. So that's Camp NaNoWriMo. There have also been some controversies with NaNoWriMo, which I talked about in my what I'm doing for Camp NaNoWriMo July video. So if you want to check out more about that, if you hear people talking about controversy, that is where I talk about that. So that's what nano or NaNoWriMo means. Wow, I've been talking for 30 minutes, great. So let me know if I got any of those wrong, because I'm sure I did. And if there's any other words that you hear floating around that maybe you know or maybe you don't, but would be good to do in another video like this. And maybe we can do a quiz with a friend, I don't know. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back on Sunday with another vlog, so check that out as always. And I'm also live, not anymore this week, but typically weekday mornings, I am live at 6 a.m. Central Time. So come right with us there. It's a good time, and I will see you in the next one.